and welcome to our second week of our stories during COVID-19. Thanks to everybody who watched and kind of tuned into last week's video, and a special thanks to the people who shared their work. And later on in this video, we're going to be looking at some of those lovely lines and words that came in from people. So our stories during COVID-19, connecting creatively. And as I mentioned last week, one of the wonderful things about creative writing is that it does give us a voice to articulate, I suppose, what's happening at the moment. It's been a very difficult time globally and of course here in Ireland as well. And the restrictions and the lockdown have been challenging for a lot of people. But even obviously more challenging is the fact that so many people have got sick, and we're very lucky, those of us that have been able to stay well and healthy during this time. And I hope that all of you that are tuning in are healthy and well this week. So the theme of this week's kind of writing prompts and tips is capturing this moment. And this moment can be today, or this moment can be the last few weeks. But how do we make sense of this time? And if we were looking back at a later stage in our lives, what would we say about this time that we've experienced, both personally and also collectively? So as we said last week as well, just grab yourself a pen and a piece of paper, and it can be the back of a shopping list, it can be a notebook. The writing prompts and the tips are hopefully a way of helping you to write, but the last thing you want to do is be worrying about things like spelling or punctuation or grammar. You know, great if those things come naturally, but if they don't, this is just about getting the words out on the page and being able to kind of sit back and say, I said what I wanted to say, and that feels really good. So I wanted to begin this week because in this moment this week, Yvonne Boland died. And Yvonne Boland is one of the greatest Irish and world writers and poets, but particularly as a woman, it is wonderful to be able to celebrate her work. And she was an incredibly important voice in Irish writing. And as we mentioned last week, the importance of being able to kind of write about where we're at now. So Yvonne Boland was one of the first writers who wrote about the domestic and who celebrated what it meant to be a woman in this time, in this place. So the poem I've chosen to share this week is called Quarantine, which for obvious reasons is very appropriate now. And it was written around for the time of the famine. So I'll just begin reading it. Quarantine by Yvonne Boland. In the worst hour of the worst season of the worst year of a whole people, a man set out from the workhouse with his wife. He was walking. They were both walking north. She was sick with famine fever and could not keep up. He lifted her and put her on his back. He walked like that west and north, until at nightfall, under freezing stars, they arrived. In the morning, they were both found dead, of cold, of hunger, of the toxins of a whole history. But her feet were held against his breastbone. The last heat of his flesh was his last gift to her. Let no love poem ever come to this threshold. There is no place here for the inexact praise of the easy graces and sensuality of the body. There is only time for this merciless inventory. Their death together in the winter of 1847. Also what they suffered, how they lived, and what there is between a man and woman, and in which darkness it can best be proved. So that's for Yvonne Boland. May she rest in peace. So if we're talking about capturing the moment, capturing this moment, a good kind of in can be to imagine ourselves at a future date and what is it we would want to say about this particular time. So if we were to write a letter to our future self about this time, what would we put in the letter? Just want you to think about that for a moment. What would we put into that letter? And we might also think about not just the words that we put into the letter. If you're thinking about it as a time capsule, it could be also the kind of what images, what pictures, what artifacts would we put in. But just for the purposes of this creative writing exercise, what would we put into the letter? And here's one perhaps experience that we could put into that letter. What has been your experience of spring this year? What words come to mind? And I'm very conscious in my own life of how many years I haven't really noticed the spring, and maybe that's part of being living in the city and not being as conscious perhaps as somebody who lives in the country is of the passing seasons. But I've been so conscious this year of spring, and the words that come to my mind, just to give you some examples perhaps of words, are, certainly the word hope comes to mind, resilience comes to mind. I suppose the in a lot of ways, whether it's the trees or whether it's the flowers or whether it's nature itself, is that in the midst of this difficult and challenging time for humans, the rest of nature goes on, and the cherry blossoms are still blossoming, and the crocuses came up, the daffodils came up, and we're heading into May. We're in May, and nature goes on as it always did. So just for you to describe your experience of spring this year and what words come into your mind. Just give yourselves a few minutes to think about that. And if you are somebody who has had to self-isolate or cocoon and actually stay in your house, then even as you're looking out the window, and we looked out last week, we were kind of looking out the window and saying, what could we see? But what signs of spring, and now spring coming into summer, could we see even from our homes? And those of us who were able to walk the 2 kilometers from our homes, what could we see? I live close to the canal here in Dublin, and the Grand Canal, and the swans are nesting at the moment, so that very much has been part of the experience of spring. So what comes to mind for you? Okay, we'll move on. And in that letter, if you talked to your future self about what your daily routine has been like during the lockdown. So is your routine different? What's changed in your routine? What does your day look like now? So I know from chatting with people, for anybody whose work has been either slowed or stopped, they do have more time, and their routines, for some people they're actually struggling to find a routine. But for others, that routine involves more time, perhaps over a cup of coffee. That routine may involve, hopefully, if they're able to go out walking more regularly and getting out into the fresh air. So what does your day look like? I know for a lot of people, they've got stuck into DIY jobs around the house. So do you have a routine where you're doing maybe some work around the house? I know that for some people, their presses have never been so clean. It's been a shock to the system to see clean presses in the house. So what does your day look like? If you can imagine your future self, even trying to imagine what that routine might be like in perhaps even a year's time, do we think it's going to be different? So as you're, when you're talking to your future self in that letter, you're not just talking about the routine, but you're talking about, okay, what the day looks like, but how you feel about it, and perhaps what your routine is like, and maybe what you'd like to change or do differently in that routine. Okay. So perhaps answering that question about what's been the hardest thing about this time. What's been the hardest thing about this time? And there may be a few things. So here are just some examples of things that I've heard people talk about in terms of what's been hard. Recently, somebody who's been living on their own, they're doing fine living on their own, but they did say, "I miss hugging people." Some very serious, many people have lost their jobs, so that's been very, very hard, and people's financial security is at stake. So that has been really, really hard for some people. Afraid for my parents. So those people who do have elderly parents, my own parents are dead, but those people who do have elderly parents, I know there's huge fear around their health and their safety. And that piece around just not knowing when it's going to end. That's been echoed in conversations with a lot of people. People are saying it's the uncertainty that's so difficult. So just not knowing when it's going to end. Some people, the hardest, just obviously kind of joking, but just getting a good haircut, wouldn't that be fantastic? We're really missing the simple pleasure of going and getting our haircut. So they were just some examples. So just think for yourself, what's been the hardest thing about this time for you, or what are those things for you that have made this time difficult and challenging. I don't know whether you can hear that, but there's a pigeon cuckooing on the roof. The pigeons have been a real constant. The sound of them during this time, I think it's with the quietness, it's more obvious. And now on to what's been good about this time. So in even when situations are difficult and challenging, hopefully there are things within that can be enjoyable and we can take some pleasure in. So what's been good about this time? And just that photograph that I've chosen, in the 2K radius from my house, I've been able to spot probably 15 of these wonderful pieces of art around, and this one is down by the canal actually as well. And it's just kind of wonderful. You're walking along, and the next minute you notice this lovely piece of art, which you think, it's painted, the electrical boxes that are painted, but it's really, really just lovely to see it, and that particular one really tickled my fancy. So for me, one of the things that's been good about this time is that I've been able to slow down and really enjoy the pleasure of where I live. And here are some examples too of what other people have been saying. More time to notice things. That's cropped up quite a bit in conversation. People are just have more time to notice the small things. The quietness. And I think that we can hear the noise is kind of coming back a little bit, but there is huge quietness, and I think we can hear the birds more when it's quiet, and often we can hear our own thoughts as well. What's been good is that we're less, for some of us, we've been less busy, and of course we're balancing that sometimes with less work and being concerned about that. But the other side is that we are less busy. So I know for myself, I'm able to, go out for very long walks and enjoy that element of freedom. Being able to finish up work early and go for a walk. And the kindness of people. There's been extraordinary kindness shown during this time. And it's been really, really heartening. So they're just some examples. So what's been good about this time for you? Just take your time. What's been good about this time for you? Okay. Now, in this section, over to you. What's been really lovely is that people have contacted me and have sent in lovely pieces of work. In fact, all the work is absolutely lovely. And what I've done is I've just chosen a few lines from the work. Now, actually, in this case, Damien's work here, this was just a lovely short little piece that he sent. And it's really lovely. It's roof tiles, birds singing, fresh views lift my spirit. Why was I so slow to step outside? So thanks to Damien for that lovely piece. And then Annabelle Tutt got in contact, and she sent me a longer piece, and I just chose a few lines to share with you. It's really, really lovely. We were as one, my mother and I. I stole her moments, so blessed to share. And in the rest of the poem, she explores the fact that sometimes things can be difficult between mothers and fathers, but it was just those lines and it really kind of really resonated. And she did say in it too, she said, without her presence, my heart was so heavy, just an empty shell. the missing beat where that depth of loneliness dwell. So just that loneliness that can come when somebody's absent from us. And this came from Veronica Williams. From the Pink Lady was the title, and again I just took some lines from this lovely piece. She wears a coat of soft red, fading into light, brush strokes of delicate pink over a canvas of soft green. Her flesh like porcelain, her body firm. And I have to say, when I was reading it, I could almost imagine biting into an apple. And that was inspired by last week when we were talking about describing fruit. So it was really lovely that Veronica responded to that particular prompt. And it was absolutely lovely, really lovely. And I'll just give you another little bit. She said, her song, crisp like crackling ice, my pearly whites sink into her nectar, tantalize my taste buds. Every bite, a pure delight. Really lovely. And this came from Fiona English, again a longer piece, but gleaming. And I just chose these just to share with you. A kaleidoscope of colour and fluid possibility, inviting me to relax deeper into its translucent waters, to bathe fully in the truth of who I am. And thanks so much to Fiona for sending that in. And so just we're going to finish up now, but remember, I'd absolutely love to hear your lines and for you to share anything that came up during this week's prompt. So there's the address, anne@creativecoaching.ie. And if you do send in some words and an image, I'd be very happy to share the image as well, if that helped. So just recapping on what we looked at this week. Our theme this week was capturing this moment, and we were imagining if we were writing a letter to our future self, what would we put into that letter? So the 3 examples we gave were just perhaps talking about our experience of spring this year, what our routine is like, and what are the things that we're finding hardest about this time, this lockdown time, but also what are the good things. And there are many, many other things that you could put into that letter, and like let your mind wander and let your imagination go into what you would say to your future self. And you might be describing very much to how you feel and the emotions that you're experiencing at the moment as well. So thanks very much for tuning in again this week, and I'm really looking forward to reading some of your work. So hopefully enjoy the bank holiday weekend, and I hope to see you next week.